Time now to dig deeper into some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senator Todd Weiler and former State Representative Rebecca Chavez-Houck. Great to have both of you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks.
Let's start with this new tactic we're seeing from protesters. We've seen it here locally and on a national level, but protesters now taking over neighborhoods where Supreme Court justices live and protesting over the leaked draft of Roe v. Wade. Rebecca, let's start with you. What do you make of this new trend that we're starting to see of them going deep into neighborhoods like this?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, Glenn. I think the first thing we need to remember is that the First Amendment does protect an individual's right to protest peacefully against their government. And so we'll start there. This new formula of going into people's neighborhoods and houses, we've also seen that in the past. I know that there have been incidences where in situations of elected officials in particular, you have people that will protest by their homes in their neighborhoods. But the court has been very clear on how that time, place, and manner can occur in terms of protest in these situations. You know, we've had abortion clinics that have dealt with protesters for well over 2 decades, and the court has upheld the ability for individuals to protest in that manner. So I think one of the things we have to look at is related to public officials. When people are in the public eye and when people are public officials, there are usually different situations that occur in terms of the protections that they have related to privacy. And maybe Senator Weiler can dig deep a little bit into that. But those are the things we need to remember, that people do have the right to protest peacefully.
Mm-hmm. Senator, your thoughts?
Yeah, so it was wrong when it happened to Angela Dunn during the COVID pandemic. It's wrong now. It's very disappointing to see people stoop to this level. I mean, some of the justices like Brett Kavanaugh have young children, and obviously their spouses, both genders, don't need to be protested. But I think that the underlying sentiment, like if we shout loud enough, they're going to change their opinion of what the law or what the Constitution means. I think it's misguided, and I think it's just another step in the erosion of civility. And I'm disappointed with the White House not calling it out more strenuously or even encouraging it at some levels from Jen Psaki. But the people that are cheering it right now because they don't like the draft opinion on abortion, this door swings both ways. And so those there'll be protesters on the liberal justices' doors next at the next controversy. And I think it's really disappointing and kind of disgusting.
Angela Dunn's neighbors and Governor Herbert's neighbors, when it was happening here locally over COVID protocols, they got really frustrated that people were blocking off the neighborhood. So,
well, and I would add, Glenn, that I am a neighbor of Dr. Dunn's, and when that did happen, it was dismaying because of what Senator Weiler mentioned about family members being affected by it. But it is an issue of balance. And
so if I could ask Rebecca, where do you find that balance in these situations?
Well, and I think it's an issue of lifting out the situation. What is the end game? What is the objective of it, and what is meant to be achieved in terms of perhaps swaying the justices' minds on that? Can that be achieved by this? I would say probably not. There's other tactics that might be more effective, but I think that's the way that we look at it.
The senator brought up that he believes the president should step in and condemn these actions. Do you agree with that?
Again, peaceable protest is protected by the First Amendment. Maybe this is not the best tactic, but I would say that, I think that we need to look at that.
Let's dig more into the issue that they're showing up to the justices' homes for, that draft that was leaked. Senator, do you see these protests and this backlash having any effect on the final outcome that could be out in a few months now?
I don't think it'll have a final effect, but I think it puts these justices and their families in an extreme amount of danger, because abortion is one of those issues where you have extremists on both sides. And if somebody tries to end the life of one of these justices to deadlock the court on a 4-4 decision, now that they see who may be supporting this draft opinion, I think, that's why, one of the justices or more have been placed into protective custody and are basically living in hiding now. This is unprecedented, and it's really scary. And I just want to say, public opinion on issues sways. public opinion on, let's say, same-sex marriage has changed dramatically in the last 11 years. And so we don't want a Supreme Court who is just doing what the public wants at that very moment, because when the courts rule, a lot of times you'll see the public will follow them over the next years. And if we'd have gone back in time with the Dred Scott decision, with Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education, the public may not have agreed with the Supreme Court, but no one's going to argue today that those decisions were wrong.
I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Rebecca. Current polling shows a majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade at this time. So talk about what the senator just brought up there.
Well, and again, I haven't had a chance to do a deep dive into the draft, but I think the concern is related to precedents. And what do we do with precedents? I mean, we just talked about First Amendment rights to protest, and that's a precedent. And how do we defend prior rulings? So anyway, I think that that's the thing that I have the most concern with, is the trajectory that could occur related to the way that the argument is being presented related to protection of privacy, how that ties to the 14th Amendment and due process. And so I think that that is the thing that is most disconcerting about the direction that the justices may be going in the regards to what has been seen so far in the draft. I think many of us are looking towards how do we protect women's reproductive health and freedom in this regard going forward. So that I think that that's where people are really focused on, is protecting people in the community.
I wanted to get your thoughts real quick on whether this will have any impact. Here locally, when we talk about Dr. Dunn and the governor, protesters didn't get their way ultimately. Do you see that happening on the national level? Rebecca.
I am hoping that that there will be some vigilance on the part of the courts to look at precedents, to really consider about the road that they're thinking of going on with this particular ruling, because that is the thing that's most disconcerting to me, is what other rights and what other privacy rights might also be swept up in this.
Mm-hmm. In the event that they do end up overturning Roe v. Wade, we're going to have patchwork laws basically across the country. Senator, your thoughts on someone not having access to abortion in the state of Utah when they could go to Colorado or Nevada and have that?
Yeah, so we had a patchwork before Roe versus Wade, and that the advantage to that is people can vote for or against state legislators based on their views on abortion. And I've heard this draft decision being described as anti-democratic. Well, if you want to look at democracy, Roe itself was anti-democratic because it took the vote away from the people, and by repealing Roe and Casey, which already partially repealed Roe, is going to restore that. So I don't think it's a terrible thing. In Utah, our trigger bill has reasonable accommodations for situations with rape and incest and the health of the mother. And so it's not, even if it's repealed, it won't end all abortions in Utah, but I think it will end some of the ones that people find most reprehensible.
Rebecca, your thoughts on this potential law patchwork throughout the country?
Yeah, I think the thing that's most disconcerting is we're talking about health care. And when you have an expectation of health care in one state, you have an expectation of health care in another state. And I think as long as we continue to look at it through that lens, that it is disconcerting that you'll have some states that will have more rigorous restrictions on this access versus others. And my concern also is if the federal ruling is more stringent related to not providing those exceptions in cases of rape, incest, and health of the mother. What does that foretell for how the states will manage that policy-wise in restricting it locally?
Mm-hmm. And we do know a couple of states don't have those exemptions in place either. I want to get your thoughts on one other quick issue. Recently, the state of Utah has responded to those redistricting lawsuits. The legislature also asking for it to be simply dropped. Senator, do you believe that that should be the case? Does this lawsuit have merit, or should it be dropped?
Well, I think the lawsuit should be dropped, and it's not just because I'm in the legislature, but if you read the Utah Constitution, it gives that right to the legislature, and so people that have not been able to win their arguments with the legislature or elect candidates who agree with them on redistricting now want to take that power away from the legislature. This district court judge, I actually know her. She's fairly new. I mean, she's not going to vote, and she's not going to rule against the Utah Constitution. So I think, although the lawsuit has some high-powered attorneys and it's well drafted, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's saying the legislature shouldn't be able to exercise the power that the Constitution gives the legislature. And so whether this motion to dismiss is granted or whether a later motion is granted, I don't think this lawsuit will ultimately be successful.
All right, Rebecca, finish us up here.
Yes, I think one thing that we might get clarified by the courts is whether there is a sole authority by the legislature to be able to redistrict. And we hope that the citizens of Utah will have their day in court, that the plaintiffs will be able to have their day in court to have that determined by the court.
All right, we of course will keep an eye on that to see how that all plays out. Thanks to both of you for being here and providing your insight this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.